Okay. Well, should probably kick things off, Chris.
Let's do it.
Just want to welcome everyone to the second Hamina Wireless APAC webinar. Based on the last one, we focused a lot just on the overall product set. We didn't get a lot of time to get into the actual the Onsite server application that we've got and the Nomad device. So I thought that the second webinar that we do, the follow-up, we should probably focus on that a little bit more. We've also had a few developments on that front as well, both on the browser side and also on the app side. So I thought we'd do a bit of a deep dive on that. Just to kick things off, so my name's Grant, Head of Technical Operations for Hamina Wireless in Asia Pacific. And we've also got on the line Chris. Chris, do you want to give yourself a quick intro?
Hello. My name's Chris. I work for a company called Invise up in Brisbane. I've been doing wireless for about 10 years or so now, and done a bunch with other survey tools. And I've recently started using Hamina, and I'm very excited and I've had a lot of fun using it. So I'm keen to talk a bit more about it today.
All right, awesome. Okay, so just a quick overview of the agenda. There's a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about relating to site surveys. I thought it would not only to show the product, but also just to sort of go through like how do we actually get to the site survey phase of things. We'll spend a bit of time with that, and then we'll get into a bit of a live demo and hopefully a bit of a Q&A as well. So I guess, like the reasons of why we would want to do a site survey, and I'll throw it over to you in a minute, Chris, but I've just put a couple of dot points on there, what I sort of think constitutes a site survey. The way that I look at it is we're looking to validate an initial predictive design. We sort of want to make sure that that it matches the real world. So, that when we put a plan together, the drywall that we put in, the brick, the concrete, the elevator shafts, all those kind of things, do they match what our initial predictive plan sort of laid out? We want to make sure that the infrastructure is in the correct location. Chris, I know you've done a lot of, implementations and site surveys and things like that. Sometimes, the actual, the positioning of the access point may not be 100% correct based on the initial plan, and that can sort of cause some sort of RF sort of issues there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose there's that human element as well. As much as we love our cabling guys, sometimes they can miss things, or sometimes they're not able to get the access point exactly where we had it on our plan. So as well as calling out anything like that, it's a good artifact to provide to customers as well after the install's done, as sort of a document of here is how things were. Sometimes access points have a habit of getting moved around after the fact, or maybe someone's not liking it sitting above their head and might get out the tinfoil or something else. We've seen that before.
Yes, so I get asked that quite a lot actually, is, can your product help locate where the access points are? And I know that, like with a lot of, modern Wi-Fi networks and with a lot of vendors, there's a lot of, especially integration with Hamina and Wi-Fi vendors around locationing of access points. But we've sort of also got to think that, a lot of networks, they do hold on to their APs for quite a while. So they may not actually have a floor plan where they can locate the access points, or, maybe someone's just outright, unplugged it from one point and moved it to another. Or, like you said, Chris, maybe they've switched it off because it's right above their head and they're correlating their headaches to the AP placement. So that can always be a factor as well. So the other thing that I've seen quite a bit is, verifying that the infrastructure's, it's transmitting the correct power levels, channels that, that we've sort of allocated. That can also correlate with like the country code. So is the right country code being deployed? Suitable data rates. So maybe, the lower data rates are still enabled, for example. Is are we able to roam properly? And so not just roam from a smartphone or a tablet, but can we place a voice call and roam and not have any sort of, packet drops? You know, the SSID counts as well as another one that I've seen. Anything to add there that I might have missed?
No, those are all good. And I guess one thing to point out is the Hamina tool, the survey tool, Onsite doesn't specifically do any roaming itself, but we'd recommend doing that testing with the device that you're using in the real world. So, for example, if you're in a warehouse and you're using a barcode scanner or a handheld client to actually validate the network with that specific device, as well as sort of a baseline of all the other stuff that you're measuring in on-site.
Yeah, exactly. I've so like a good example that I used to see was you'd get two VoIP phones, and you'd play a song on loop on one, and you'd make a call to the other phone. You just walk around the environment, and you know, because would you be able to hear the audio clearly on the other end of the phone? So that's a real simple way to sort of look at it. But yeah, again, you know, if you've got things like barcode scanners, specialized devices that help in stock picking and warehousing, computers on wheels, things like that. There's probably a couple of other things that we need to sort of try and do to make sure that they're going to be able to, effectively roam around the environment. The identification of obstructions. Obstructions could be, it might be a greenfield site, and there's been some fire escape doors that have been put in that weren't there on the original floor plan. So that could, throw some turmoil into your coverage. And then also identifying interference. So that might be, looking at things like spectrum analysis, or even just interference in the way of, I guess we should probably say, co-channel contention, which would be like, either our own infrastructure or surrounding infrastructure as well, if it's a busy environment. And then, of course, we want to sort of put together some sort of a report for project sign-off. All right. So there's a couple of ways we can do site surveys. Some of these are going to be more popular than others. Some of these are going to be more frequent than others. A lot of the time it is going to boil down to the type of project. Sometimes it's going to be budget. Sometimes it's going to be the environment. There's a whole lot of factors that are sort of going to go in there. Anything that you think I might have missed there, Chris, or anything that you sort of want to call out specifically?
Yeah, I guess just to stress as well, like probably the most common one is the pre-survey. Even a lot of vendors will offer to do a pre-survey at the moment, but it kind of only tells half or less than half the story. Super important to do what you were talking about before on the last slide, doing that validation, checking your homework. That's arguably the more important one, because that's factoring in what's actually happening in the real world. Looking down the list, AP on a stick, in terms of a full survey with AP on a stick, is becoming less common. Yep. But that's super important in cases where you can't really model the environment very easily. Maybe like some weird and wonderful manufacturing environment. AP on a stick is really good to try out AP placements. I think I'm going to talk about that specifically a bit later on.
So the pre-surveys is the really good point there is that when we're doing an initial, plan, using Hamina Planner, we are doing it in like a very static environment. So we don't have any neighboring networks or anything like that. We're not really simulating that. The pre-survey is a really good way to understand what does the environment look like, and we can also take data from that and help us, sort of build our RF model from that side. So that can be really handy and really good when it's a tricky environment, or maybe like a historical building, which we often come across in Australia. AP on a stick, absolutely. Again, if it's historical or if it's a tricky environment where we really need to be super accurate with the AP placement, or maybe we're working with directional antennas and things like that, where we really need to be very, again, pinpoint with the accuracy, but also sort of get the right down tilt and the right angle for the antenna. That can be really important. Validation survey, I'd say, is probably what we see pretty often, right? So we'll sort of go from the initial like predictive plan to the validation. Periodic surveys, where we're sort of checking in on the infrastructure. Although we've got some API integrations that might make that a little bit less common. I'm not sure if you've ever done a remediation survey, Chris. That's usually that can usually be pretty tricky. Where we want to redeploy some existing infrastructure. Maybe it wasn't the best design to start with. That can be really quite tough to do.
Yeah, it's that juggling act, isn't it? A lot of customers, while they'll say, ignore the existing design in terms of where access point placement is. The reality is, they like to reuse existing cabling. Oftentimes, customers will have a third or fourth Wi-Fi deployment with the same cabling placement, with the expectation that it should just be working, or that newer generation of access points will be better. But oftentimes, it's actually the opposite. So,
Yep.
Really good to go and get all that info. I will just say on the pre-survey side as well. If you can get your customer to agree to do a pre-survey, even if it's just of a portion, a representative portion of the environment, that's going to give you really, really valuable data to feed your predictive design or your proposed design. But I think as well, just walking an environment as an engineer, taking photos, you'll notice things that'll help you, and the ability to do that and take photos in the Onsite app is really powerful, a powerful way of doing that and capturing notes and things like that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of asking a lot of questions. And I think we talk about it a little bit in one of the later slides where, I would often try and approach like the department heads, in different departments, and actually just, introduce myself, explain what I'm doing, and just ask them some questions around the current Wi-Fi experience, because they're going to be the ones that they're dealing with, Wi-Fi problems, on a daily basis. And so that can often help sort of uncover what's happening. But yeah, the pre-survey can be really great because you can actually understand like, hey, like why have we got 10 SSIDs, right? That can be a real, like, do we actually need that? Or why have we got like, again, very basic, but why have we got these really low data rates? Like, is that for a particular client that is using that requires that? Or is that just being left on from the initial implementation that was done, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago? And now times have sort of changed. Remediation could also be sort of expansion as well. And then, you've got the sort of the troubleshooting surveys, which, if I'm going to start a troubleshooting process, the first thing I'm usually going to do, and everyone's got their own sort of methodology, but if I'm coming in as like sort of an independent third party, which I often would, back in the day, I would come in, the first thing I would do is I would do a survey of the affected area to understand, almost like what you've talked about in that pre-survey. I want to understand what's happening in the environment. That might actually give me a bit of an idea of what's actually happening. Okay, so I've put in brackets here a typical network project timeline, because this can be a little bit different depending on all the different survey types that we actually had and that we listed earlier. And so we've sort of got here, the first thing I normally try to do is define my requirements, right? So, is it a greenfield or a brownfield site? What is the scope area, which is very important, because a lot of the time the initial scope area is everywhere, but then we've sort of got to make some considerations and, do we want access points in plant rooms? Do we want them in bathrooms? Do we want them in elevators and stairwells? So areas that are typically pretty tricky to deploy into, or maybe we don't want to actually deploy access points into. And so that obviously will affect budget and things like that as well. What workflows are we looking to achieve on the network? And so I always try to look at it from a perspective of let's not think about what are we doing today with the network and maybe like within the next 12 months, but if we're going to hold on to this Wi-Fi network for 5+ years, what are we expecting that's going to come down the pipe that we're going to need to do on that network? right? And so is there some design considerations that we can put into place that's going to make it a little bit more usable in future years? The clients as well. So what clients are going to be used, and what are the deliverables, right? How do we get sign off on the project, right? And so we're probably going to have different milestones for when the initial plan is done, right? When the infrastructure is deployed, when the survey is done, when the deliverables are done for that. Anything to add to that, Chris?
Yeah, I guess everything comes back to those requirements at the end of the day. Ultimately, that's what determines the thresholds that you put in Planner. It's going to measure your success in terms of when you come out the other side with Onsite, and make sure that that is what you expected. Absolutely, as well. I could talk to the client about their use cases, what devices they're going to be using, what users are going to be doing with those devices, and you'll start to get a feel of where some of those in scope areas may or may not be. Yeah, oftentimes the starting point is we want coverage everywhere, but as soon as you start to talk to people about the complexity and challenges of getting access points and stairwells and the costs associated with that, typically that kind of winds back. So as an example, aged care facility, one example was nurses would take calls or receive calls from the nurses station and then walk with their handset to a patient's room or a resident's room and then continue that call. So kind of from there, you can interpret that requirement as, hey, I need to maintain roaming seamlessly from this point to that point. And that's actually something you can model in Planner as well, what that journey would be, which access points the client would roam to. So when you start to understand that, that's your starting point, and you can kind of filter that down into your actual technical requirements in the tools.
Yep. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's perfect. Yeah. I sort of like to, I've coined the sort of, it's like the Wi-Fi questionnaire as a part of the requirements, and you've just, you can make your own list, depending on what you're looking to achieve, and depend on the company that you work for. But this, and it could be you're doing it internally for your own company, or it could be you're a system integrator and you're going to go out and ask these questions to your prospective customers. But yeah, it would be it's sort of like a 21 questions, and the more information that they can provide, the better. And again, this helps, if you can go and do that pre-survey, because then you can actually go and talk to the different department heads, and then you can find out even more information. Because if it's just coming from, maybe like the CEO, for example, they're only going to see a small portion of the overall requirement, but you're going to get a lot more information if you go down into those individual departments, for example, as well.
Yeah, talking to users as well about where problem spots might be is gold.
Yeah. I've done some aged care and healthcare, and the nursing staff are generally not shy of letting you know, issues that are affecting their ability to do their job. And sort of in the middle here, we've got, we've talked about the pre-survey design AP on a stick. We've got the deploy the infrastructure, right? So you do the pre-survey design or AP on a stick, maybe a combination of. We've got the deployment of the infrastructure, and then we've sort of got the survey itself. So depending on what type of survey it might be. And then we've got the network tuning. So a lot of the time, what I've found is when we do the initial survey, is the network was deployed and a lot of reliance was put on like the automated components that the vendor would support. So automatic channel, automatic transmit power mechanisms and things like that. And so it would generally require a little bit of tuning. And so that's why I've got that little sort of back and forth arrow there, where sometimes you may need to do an initial survey. This is what the result is. We've got different access points that are, blasting huge amounts of transmit power, and we've got others that are really down tuned. We can probably do a little bit more tuning there. That's not going to affect like roaming characteristics and things like that. To your example of staff that are walking through large parts of a facility on a voice call, if their client is trying to hang on to a call, from another part of a building, that's not going to cause, that's not going to be a very great, user experience. So yeah, we've got the network tuning there. And then we've got the report side of things. So, again, you want to be able to get the report, to the point where you've done the network tuning, you've done the initial, you've done another survey for it, possibly, and then you're going to provide that. Now, again, the scope and your scope may not, your deliverable, it may not include doing a network tune, for example. Report could also be a part of the pre-survey design or API on a stick. That's generally going to be how the workflow would be. But I've just put report in at the end here. And so, I always look at, like, what was the methodology, right? So what were the methods that were employed? What were the constraints that we encountered? So if I can't get into a certain area, I sort of want to put that down as an example. What were the results? What were the outcomes? And then, what are we going to conclude with? So you sort of, you want the, particularly, if you're giving it to a stakeholder that may not be like a Wi-Fi engineer or a Wi-Fi expert, they're going to want to understand, like, what do I need to do next, right? And maybe a part of that is, look, we've got to tune the network now a little bit. That's what the next step might be, as an example. And then hopefully we get into the sign-off phase. So we've got the deliverables, project is complete, and then we're sort of, we're done. Anything to add to that part of it, Chris?
Yeah, the report, I guess, as always, who is your target audience? It may be a customer who, like you said, Grant, is not necessarily interested in the technical details as much as the result, and sort of whether you've done a good job and you did what you said you were going to do, your design has met your requirements, users are happy. But the other one is, yourself in 2 or 3 years, or, if you're working internally for a customer, or that customer does another survey, what was the configuration of the network? What was the snapshot of the settings at that point in time? So one thing I like to do is either just dump a configuration out, or a snapshot of the environment of the AP's channel width, radio state. So you've kind of got the infrastructure's view of the environment, but then you've also got your survey view, so that if you come and do things like adjusting transmit power, that, hey, that access point there was at negative 18 dBm, and then the survey showed the coverage as blah. So you can make an informed decision about tuning later on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The other thing I was just going to add with reports is, please, if you've got the ability to give a 50, 100, 150 page report, don't do it. Short, concise reports are much more valuable, particularly as we've sort of just talked about. If the person is non-technical, they are not going to go through all the visualizations, and they're not going to understand it. So it's all about, what information is concise that I can show them that makes it super clear. To put like a sales hat on for a second, I do think that the browser-based deliverable that Hamina do is really quite valuable. It makes it very easy to understand. And so, that's something that we're finding a lot of customers have sort of found some really good value in. Of course, you can still extract as a PDF, and you can extract it as a 100-page PDF if you want as well. And maybe that's a part of the sign-off and the deliverable. But at least, the report side of it that is going to go through and you would review it with the stakeholders, it's doing it in a browser, it's very interactive, and it's very easy to understand.
100%. And I think as well, the value there is giving people a static report that they're probably going to only read the first 2 pages, versus walking them through your design methodology, kind of repeating their requirements back to them, telling them how you did it, and telling them why you made particular decisions, and probably giving them a little bit of an education on Wi-Fi along the way. You'll build trust with them, and you'll end up in a position where they're not second guessing you every step of the way as well about particular decisions. Every time I've done that with a customer who's kind of been a little bit skeptical of, why have you put access points here, or that seems like a lot, or that doesn't seem like enough, things like that. Walking them through the process, walking them through how the tool works, how the maths works. At the end of that conversation, they're sold, basically. And I think the browser-based interactive tool is a great way to do that, because you can walk them through it on a call, but you can also leave them with that link that they can go and play and interact with, and demonstrate that to other people as well in future. So like Grant said, I think maybe there's this illusion somewhere that the more pages of report means you're justifying your value more. But I think we kind of need to flip that on its head of giving, if artifacts are required, sure, print the PDF, file it away. But in terms of actually articulating or doing what the report needs to do, did the design meet its requirements, and why and how and all the rest of it? I think the better tool is to use that interactive viewer.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So equipment that we need, and look, this is going to be a bit of a, a bit more open depending on, who's doing the survey. But laser measure or a tape measure, so you can actually scale the floor plan in the real world. I know that sometimes we get scaled or drawn to scale floor plans. I still prefer to actually measure it off a really large environment or a large room, regardless, because if the scale is out, or if it's already got a scale built into it, that I have trust issues with that. I like to have a hard copy of the floor plan, so that way I can do really easy markup. Of course, if you're doing a survey on an iPad, you can have a digital copy, and you can just do you can do easy markup on an iPad as well. So there's that. You're going to need a survey client. So if you're using Hamina Onsite, it's going to be an iOS or an M series MacBook Pro, iOS device or MacBook Pro. The survey device, we've listed the Nomad there. We do support, of course, you can survey if you're using an M series MacBook, or a WLAN Pi. But the Nomad has sort of got, it's got the radios, the 6E capable radios. So it's going to make the survey component significantly faster. Complementary tools. I'm not going to list a bunch of third parties here, so I just listed the WLAN Pi, but there is plenty of other tools that are on the market that can help, that are capable of doing quick scans of environments and things like that you may want to bring along as well. Comfortable shoes make a big difference. Chris, I know when we were spending some time on site, I like my comfortable Vans shoes for sure. And then, of course, coffee and snacks. An ex-colleague a long time ago said to me, "You never know when your next meal will be." So we'd always pack muesli bars, and that's very true because sometimes when you're doing a survey, you may be on site far longer than what you expected, and we'll sort of talk about some of the considerations on the next slide. But you may not be able to enter rooms when you actually want to, and so you may be waiting around for longer periods of time, or what I've had in the past as well is the sites are a little bit more remote. So if you want to go and get some food or drink or something like that, it's a short drive, and then you've got to go back to sort of a like a work site, and so it's better if you don't have to leave, and you can just get the work done much quicker. Anything to add there, Chris? I think you've got yourself a laser measure already, right? Like I think you bought that on site.
Yeah, they're worth their weight in gold, especially if you're going for that longest measurement, which is the best. Obviously, it goes without saying, make sure those devices are charged. Doesn't hurt to bring chargers and things like that as well. If you're going to have a break, you might end up taking twice as long. Boy Scout motto, isn't it? Be prepared.
Yeah, be prepared. Yeah. So just some considerations. Obviously floor plans. Obviously having something to scale. Understanding the scope of work. So that might be where you do and don't need to survey. So if it's a large campus, do you have to do the outdoor survey? If you do, I would probably be doing it in the early morning or late afternoon. Don't do it in the middle of the day. It's going to be really hot. What does the timeline look like? How long have we got on site? Do we only have a morning? Do we have a full day? Do we have 3 days? Understanding what the budget is as well. So, you may have to survey only part of it if the budget's not there. What is the expected vendor? What is the AP model? And so, that can correlate with your survey results as well. Operational hours. So we found this out pretty quickly as well, right? Was, when is the site open? When does it close? If the site's operational, then it might be ideal if you can get in a few hours before all the staff get in. And particularly, if the site is open late, it might be better to survey some of the busier areas after hours as well. So does that fit in with your schedule? What type of environment? Are there any site clearance requirements? So for instance, if it's a work site, at least in Australia, you need a white card. If it's like in an educational environment, you may need a blue card, for example. I've had requirements of like police background checks for some sites as well. You may need a site escort as well, so like security that can follow you around. Any sort of safety gear, and then you may also need to do an induction. And so sometimes what I've found, Chris, like the induction is only done like on a Monday morning. So if you've got to fly into a site, for example, Australia's a big place, you have to fly in on the Sunday evening to then be able to do the induction at like 5 a.m. Monday morning, because that's the only time they do inductions, for example, if it's a work site. Anything to add there?
Yeah, I guess on the safety gear piece, possibly required at some sites, but also just handy for others. I know, Grant, you've got a slightly different experience, but I've found if I wear a high vis, even if I don't need one, I tend to get asked less questions about what are you doing. Walking around with your shiny handbag. People have got varying, possibly non-scientific views on Wi-Fi and radio, and can get a little bit funny about stuff like that. So if you can as well, just have a think about maybe a quick 10-second description of what you're doing, just to make people feel a little bit more comfortable. You will get asked, especially if you need to just, maybe walk into a room and knock on the door and say what you're there to do. Sometimes I just say I'm measuring the wireless signal strength, or seeing how good the Wi-Fi is in here is a good one. And oftentimes you'll kind of field a few troubleshooting calls, which you can make notes of.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, and so sometimes with safety gear, it will be required. Like you need to wear steel cap boots, or you need to have a hard hat, things like that. Or you may need to be wearing a high vis, because you're like a contractor as well. So yeah. So just a couple of tips and tricks that I found. And this isn't in any particular order, but communicate to the site what your attendance window is going to be. Particularly if there's like a site contact, then that's sort of all going to run through them. Ideally, that they will notify the site that that you are going to be there as well. So people are sort of expecting you. They're not sort of like, hey, who's the guy walking around with the little black box and the high vis. They are already expecting you, which does tend to curb the amount of questions, which means you can get on with the job. The usage hours as well. So we found that out pretty quick, Chris, where there was a site with a lot of meeting rooms. I've sort of put in there, it's good to pre-book them ahead of time. And then that way you can get into the meeting rooms without having to wait, as we've done all the common areas and we're sort of waiting for like those one or two meeting rooms at the very, very end. In my previous experience, it's sort of been more about getting into certain areas of a facility, like it might be an operating theatre, or like it might be like a special ward on a hospital, for example, where you need a site escort, and patients are not going to be in the ward, or it's going to be a lot quieter during certain times, and so it's just trying to sort of juggle when those times are going to be, and so you sort of pre-book them ahead of time as well. I like to pre-walk the site if I can as well, particularly if it's a large site. I'll usually do it with the site coordinator if I can, so that they can help sort of point out any bits and pieces, and usually they can sort of introduce you to if the site's got any security and things like that, so people are sort of aware of who you are, and you've sort of got the blessing of the site coordinator, and so that way again curbs the amount of questions. I like to survey from difficult to easy. So the most difficult environment or area, I prefer to do that first, because the easy ones can be done generally a lot quicker, and so it gives you a better idea of how much longer it's going to take for you to finish. in saying that, I also recommend if you are going to do a lot of site surveys, that this is something where you work out what your approximate, like, square feet or square meter coverage is per day on average. And so that way it allows you to look at a project and say, okay, I know that this is going to take me 5 days on average. I think that that's a really good thing to do. Stop and review, so make sure that your data is getting captured correctly, that you're not missing any areas that you need to, that you said, oh, that room's busy, I'm going to come back to it, and then you forget all about it, and then in your report you've left site, you realize you've skipped an area. We talked about asking questions, and you also asked about, you also mentioned the lots of photos as well. But of course, get permission that you've got the ability to do that as well, because there may be sensitive information.
Yeah, and I think the the stop and review is super important, especially before you leave site. I like to leave myself notes on the floor plan if there's a room I have to come back to or something that I didn't get, and then just make sure before you leave, because it's a pain to go out again and not a good look.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. So let's get into let's actually show the product. So we can, all right, everyone should be able to see this. So now this was a survey that I did just the other week, local shopping centre, and so the thing to keep in mind with Hamina is we keep the we've got the 2 products. We've got the network planner product, which is cloud-based. It's in a browser, and then you can do the data review also in browser as well. And so you've got a simulation side, which you can see that there's nothing there, and then you've got a survey side. And so when we go into the survey side, you'll see that we've sort of got all these different survey parts, and we've got these different sort of networks and AP names and things like that in there. Now, if I sort of just zoom out a little bit, I don't have a heat map enabled at the moment. The free Wi-Fi network is probably the most reliable one that's consistent throughout the environment. I didn't actually connect to it because it was asking for quite a lot of information. I did post that up on LinkedIn. I'm not sure if anyone saw that, but it was pretty ridiculous. It was asking for all sorts of information. But you'll see here, I've sort of, I can bring up the Wi-Fi coverage on the free Wi-Fi SSID. I've got my coverage there. I can sort of zoom in. I can move my mouse around, and it'll give me some bits and pieces there. Now, I can also extrapolate the data, so I can increase the guess range and sort of, get a better understanding of what the environment may look like. I can bring that back to my, my sort of default as well. Now, we've just recently introduced, so for a while, we've had coverage, secondary coverage, and SNR. We did also recently introduce interference into the mix as well. So we do have that there as well. And so we can sort of move through, and we're slowly sort of bringing some more information in there, like the AP name and things like that. And so this is a really nice sort of way to understand, okay, well, what does the environment look like? At the moment, I'm just looking at it from my network. So that's just the free Wi-Fi SSID. I can look at all networks, and we sort of see really quickly it gets really, really bad. With the amount of networks that are visible in that sort of environment. So I can adjust these thresholds as well if I want. But basically, any more than 2 APs broadcasting on that channel, we're going to have that. We're going to have that visualization sort of light up. So how do we get to this? And so what I'll do is I'll do a quick screen share. And so we'll turn this on. There we go. Okay. I'll bring so I've got my iPad just on my desk here. So we've got this. So I've got a real-time view. I've got my Nomad connected here. So if anyone's seen the Nomad, we've got a little light saying we're on USB-C interface. Little black box. It's got some little connectors on the top there. So there's little funny ears if you're wondering what they are. They will basically allow me to set the Nomad to either survey on my hip, or I can reorientate it and I can have it sort of surveyed from my chest. And so, depending on what you're looking to do, the hip is the more traditional way. The chest is probably a really good indicator of where a lot of client devices are, as people tend to hold their phone sort of at chest level, or they've got a laptop and whatnot. So again, it just sort of depends what you're looking to do. So I do have a real-time view built into the survey app, which is really quite nice. I've got these elements here, right? Got different networks, etc., etc. Now, what I'm going to do first, though, is I'm going to go into the test application, and I just want to show folks here what we've got. So I'm just going to give this a 10-meter orientation. So what we can do is we'll zoom in. Now, what we can do is we can do a sort of a basic survey, right? And so I can do a continuous survey, which we see I've selected on the left there. When I'm doing the survey, I get this sort of strip down the bottom that tells me what the current signal is based on my associated SSID. This is going to look a little bit boring to what we were used to when we're on site, Chris, because I'm not moving in my environment. But typically I'm going to walk through an environment, and I'm going to stop. Now, what it's going to do is it finds an access point, right? And so it finds the same, the AP that I'm associated to, Hyperdyne system on channel 100 on 5 gigahertz. So one of the new things that we're bringing out really soon is the ability to do AP on a stick. And so what I can do is I can select that AP as AP on a stick. I can move this AP around if I want. Right. So I can move him there, and I can close that dialog box down, and then I can do another survey. So, this time I might survey, might go into the room now. And then we stop. And then what you'll see is I click on the AP, I've got the exact same access point, right? So there's no difference between the two APs. And so again, I can do, okay, this was an AP on a stick AP. I can click and I can move him around again. And so each time I select one of these APs, I get totally different distinguishable signal. And so I know a lot of people have been asking for this. And so we're in the sort of final stages of getting this implemented into the production app.
I guess for those people watching the webinar, AP on a stick is not a delicious sounding snack. It's where you would take an access point on a tripod or similar with a battery, and you'd try out a bunch of different access point placements to see where the best might be.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. One of the things that I recommend if you are going to do AP on a stick, and we talked about it in some of the slides, is do an initial plan so you know roughly where you are going to place those APs on that stick. If you walk into a site blind and you sort of start to look at it and you think, okay, where's a good place to put an AP? It can take and chew up considerable time following that process. As you can see here, my preference for AP on a stick is that it's a 2-person job. Is you've got one person doing the surveying and you've got one person moving the AP. If you've got walkie-talkies, great. Otherwise, phone works as well, because then that way you can actually, you can radio them or call them and say, okay, can you move the access point to the next position? And off they sort of go. But otherwise, yeah, it can be, it can be a bit, a little bit tricky just as a one-person job. But again, if we're going to move the access point into a different environment, so, again, we might move to the dining area. We start doing our survey. And so, as Chris said, in theory, we would have the Vietnam access point on a telescopic pole. We would physically move it into this dining area here, right? So we would survey. Like so. We find the AP again. And then we would say, okay, this is an AP on a stick, right? And so basically what that's allowing is that we can duplicate that access point multiple times throughout the survey process, rather than the on-site app thinking that it's all part of the one AP, just with a really, really large coverage area. And so, the example is if you select each of the individual APs, they've got different coverage cells, but they are all showing as the same AP. So that's something that's coming fairly soon to the mainline Hamina Onsite app. If we jump back to the other app here, like I said before, we've got a real-time view, which looks a little bit boring in my work environment, but you can sort of see we've got some Aruba, Juniper, and Google networks in the environment. I can go back into demo here. I can go back into the hospital environment. So you'll see here, same floor plan from before. Maybe we'll go into a different one. We'll go into this one here. So we've got a hospital environment here. And again, the ability to do different survey types. So, we've got a line survey here, which is really good for, okay, we've got this big corridor we can walk down. So we would physically walk down the corridor, get to the other end, and we're finished. Right, so it's from point A to point B, done, no more. We've got the point surveys here. Right, so with the point surveys, we might do that like in the bathroom environments because they're a little bit trickier to walk around in and things like that. So we could do something like this. And then we've got the more classic continuous survey where you would walk, from the corridor. I usually like to mark when I'm actually in the room. You go back to here, and then we might just, we could walk in and out of that bathroom to here. Now, you could finish the survey right there and we're done. Or, you might also want to do a survey across multiple rooms. So there's no real right or wrong way to do it. It's more a matter of, am I getting the signal captured on both sides of a wall? Hopefully the answer is yes. We end up with something like this. And so that sync is all done now. So if I move the iPad off to the side, we can go into the demo here. We've got the Wi-Fi, hotel Wi-Fi Fornia, and we've got the survey data there that was just what we were showing before. So that all just sort of syncs up without too much real issue. You go back to simulation, you'll see here we've got our simulated data on one side. Go back over to survey, we've got our survey data on the other. So again, we can look at those different access points as well. And so the main difference here is when we were doing the AP on a stick demo from earlier, we saw that was on channel 100 up and on system. It's a Aruba AP. You'll see here that the signal covers the entire area. It's not split up into 3 different AP on a stick individual surveys because this is the entire environment. And that's showing the signal coverage of that AP. Now, it's not going to look like a real survey because I am just sitting in my desk area, in my office area here. But in production, we would be walking in and out of the different rooms physically. and you would be getting a bit of a fluctuation on the different signal levels. And ideally, you would have multiple access points, and enterprise APs, so they would all be broadcast in the same SSID, and you would be able to see different coverage cells sort of across the board. So you would see something a little bit more similar to this one here, where if we go back into coverage, you'll see here, as we click on the different APs, we get their different coverage cells, but we still get the same network component. All right. Anything to add, Chris?
No, not on that, I guess. Country Road's looking a bit sad from a coverage perspective.
Yeah, this whole area here was just not existent. You can sort of see, if you look down the bottom legend, like it's like neg 86, like there's just no infrastructure here sort of at all. Yeah, which is really weird. There's definitely stuff there, but it's not the free Wi-Fi, unfortunately. So it's something else. We can, yeah. And you can sort of see, like, all the different networks that were broadcasting. So, that's why the interference was showing so bad.
So you're talking before about interference as well, the new feature that'll be coming. So I guess, again, for those on the call, that is something that you may be used to seeing as channel interference in other tools. So really that's just how many access points am I hearing on the same channel, either for my access points, my infrastructure that I'm concerned about, my SSIDs, or for everything. So Grant, we were talking about it before, probably a more common term that's used in the industry would be co-channel contention, because it's really just, that's the way that the protocol works. You've got more than one access point on a given channel. There's proper rules around contention, as opposed to the actual non-Wi-Fi interference. So just for those who might be wondering, are we able to talk any more about the spectrum analysis stuff?
So I'll address that in a sec. That's probably a good point to make. So just to be clear, the Wi-Fi interference, we're labeling it as a beta, but it is publicly available now, and so we will bring that into the mobile app soon as well. And so that data is captured, but not viewable in the mobile app yet. We are going to bring that out very soon, but it is in the browser, and so you can report on that information. And so we thought that was the more critical component, that you could see it in the browser and report on that. Absolutely. And yes, in this case, interference is basically number of broadcasting radios on a particular channel. And so you've got the ability to filter that here, or you've sort of got the ability to add some arbitrary filtering in here as well. Spectrum analysis is, we are working on that as well. We will have that, soon, I would say. I don't want to sort of comment on a timeline as yet, but yeah, it shouldn't be too far off as well. So there'll be a little bit more to talk about, hopefully soon. So I might just see if there's any questions. If anyone's got anything to ask, please fire away. Otherwise, that's sort of it for today. I do hope that the slide content was sort of enough. I know, surveys are sort of, they can be a little bit contentious. They're always a little bit different. People have got their own sort of ways of doing them, and their own methods of getting through them and completing them. It really comes down to, sometimes the individual, sometimes the business, and what they're looking to achieve from an outcome perspective. But yeah, I hope we were able to get some of the core ideas there. Oh, the one other thing I would just say is, and Chris, you sort of mentioned it earlier, didn't mean to mention it as well, is the photo capabilities as well. So, having the ability to take photo notes, in the application, you can sort of, you can colorize the notes, you can sort of change the icons on the notes and things like that as well. That's a really nice capability as well. And I know when we were on site and with the app sort of syncing between the two devices, Chris was able to take photos of some of the infrastructure. I was able to do some of the surveys, then we sort of reversed roles, and that was a really quite a dynamic way of achieving it. So, if you're sort of looking at Hamina or at the Onsite product, and you've got a large campus or you do a lot of survey work, it may make sense to get a few of the Nomad devices, and you can sort of divide and conquer the survey component as well.
Absolutely. I think one other thing to mention there about, especially more on the validation side of things, if you're trying to create a document with the final sort of locations, the tool's pretty good at getting the access points, depending on where you're surveying, the positioning correct. You might have to tweak them slightly. What makes that easier, though, is if you, in your infrastructure, enable the advertise AP name parameter. That's what it's called in a Aruba dashboard. But that will allow the access point under an SSID specifically to tell in the beacon frame its name. And that will automatically populate in the tool as well. Just don't forget to turn it off when you're finished.
Good tip. Yeah, good tip. All right. Well, look, that might be we might end it there for now. But look, Chris, really appreciate you coming on today and having a chat. It was really good to do some surveying on site with you as well. And appreciate people for jumping on today's webinar. Hope to see everyone on the next one.
Thanks, Grant.
Awesome. All right, we will end it there. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
See ya.